Alright guys, so we have been talking about how both the governments of Israel and the United States have been completely losing their minds over the last week after the International Criminal Court decided to issue an application for arrest warrants against top Hamas leaders as well as Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. And as a part of this freakout, we've seen the Israeli government come out and try to give the implication that the ICC is basically the reincarnation of Nazi Germany. Karim Khan, the lead prosecutor at the ICC who's bringing these charges, is basically Hitler 2.0. We've seen the United States government, under the Biden administration, float the idea of sanctioning the ICC for daring to go after one of our best buddies. And as that being the backdrop of this conversation, we now get this reporting. So this is from a combination of The Guardian, as well as Local Call and 972 magazine. You'll remember 972 because I've used a lot of their reporting, for example, on things like the Lavender program or Where's Daddy, the AI implementations by Israel as a part of their genocidal campaign in Gaza. So here's the headline from this newest piece. Spying, hacking, and intimidation. Israel's 9-year war on the ICC exposed. So this may end up being a really long video, but you should really stick around for the entirety of it because this just gets more and more insane as we go down through this article. So they start off here. When the chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Court announced that he was seeking arrest warrants against Israeli and Hamas leaders, he issued a cryptic warning saying, quote, "I insist that all attempts to impede, intimidate, or improperly influence the officials of this court must cease immediately." Karim Khan did not provide specific details of attempts to interfere in the ICC's work, but he noted a clause in the court's foundational treaty that made any such interference a criminal offense. If the conduct continued, he added, my office will not hesitate to act. The prosecutor did not say who had attempted to intervene in the administration of justice or exactly how they had done so, but I think that we all know who he was referencing. He was referencing the governments of Israel and the United States. And we had that quote when he was doing a sit-down interview after he issued this application with a CNN anchor, and he basically said that a senior official, we don't know if it was an Israeli official or a US official, told him behind the scenes, straight up, that the purpose of the International Criminal Court is to go after Africa and to go after thugs like Putin. Okay, not to go after the West, not to go after our allies, but to go after Africa and our geopolitical adversaries, right? The enemies of the United States. Okay, that was something that was said to him behind the scenes. We don't know who said it. There are some guesses out there that it was probably Lindsey Graham. The timeline works out on that. But anyways, we move on here. I think it's pretty clear who was, trying to impede in this process. And it's important to note, this is a criminal offense. Okay, under the ICC statutes and rules. Now, of course, the United States, Israel, even Russia, China, they are not party to the ICC. Okay, so they don't technically, the ICC doesn't have any enforceability mechanism against the United States, but this is technically a criminal offense. So they could end up going after Joe Biden if he decides to implement sanctions against the ICC as a retaliation for trying to issue these arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. So keep that in the back of your mind. They continue, though. They say now, an investigation by The Guardian and the Israeli-based magazine 972 and Local Call can reveal how Israel has run an almost decade-long secret war against the court. The country deployed its intelligence agencies to surveil, hack, pressure, smear, and allegedly threaten senior ICC staff in an effort to derail the court's inquiries. Israeli intelligence captured the communications of numerous ICC officials, including Khan and his predecessor as prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, intercepting phone calls, messages, emails, and documents. They're straight up hacking into, they are spying on the lead prosecutors at the International Criminal Court, okay, for daring to open up, at the time, even like preliminary examinations of potential Israeli war crimes. This is how freaked out they are. This is how intimidated they are of the ICC. Now again, the enforceability mechanism of the ICC is the fact that there are 124 countries around the world that are signatories. And so if these applications if the arrest warrants are actually finalized by the court and they're issued, then Benjamin Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant are going to have a significant amount of trouble traveling to any one of those 124 countries without being potentially subject to arrest. And we've seen prominent countries, including even European countries, who have said that if the warrants are issued, they will abide by that and arrest them if they step foot in their country. So, I mean, it is a big deal, even though the ICC doesn't have like a military or a police force. They're not going to go to Israel and arrest Benjamin Netanyahu. It still is a significant thing, right? Now, they continue. They say the surveillance was ongoing in recent months, providing Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with advanced knowledge of the prosecutor's intentions. This is probably why we got leaked story after leaked story in the lead up to these the application for these arrest warrants coming out, right? This was something that we had floated weeks prior, and I guess maybe that was potentially because Netanyahu himself was floating this, right? A recent intercepted communication suggests that Khan wanted to issue arrest warrants against Israelis, but was under, quote, tremendous pressure from the United States, according to a source familiar with its contents. Netanyahu has taken a close interest in the intelligence operations against the ICC and was described by one intelligence source as being, quote, obsessed with intercepts about the case. So clearly he's seeing this as a threat to himself, right? Overseen by his national security advisors, the efforts involved the domestic spy agency Shin Bet, as well as the military's intelligence directorate Amman and cyber intelligence division Unit 8200. The intelligence gleaned from the intercepts was, according to these sources, disseminated to government ministries of justice, foreign affairs, and strategic affairs. So they were utilizing multiple different government apparatuses here to try to spy on, to hack into, and then to try to use the United States as the big dog in the room to go and intimidate and attack the ICC on behalf of Israel. Okay, they continue. They say, a covert operation against Bensouda, revealed on Tuesday by The Guardian, was run personally by Netanyahu's close ally, Yossi Cohen, who was at the time the director of Israel's foreign intelligence agency, Mossad. At one stage, the spy chief even enlisted the help of then President of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Joseph Kabila. You have the head of Mossad, okay, Israel's CIA, if you will, that is a very close ally of Benjamin Netanyahu, and he is directly, personally, as they put it here, running covert operations against the lead prosecutor at the time of the ICC. Guys, this is fucking insane. They continue. Khan's decision, recently to seek arrest warrants against Netanyahu and his defense minister Gallant, along with Hamas leaders for October 7th, marks the first time an ICC prosecutor has sought arrest warrants against the leader of a close Western ally. So, I mean, that's part of the reason why I say that this is incredibly important, is because, when allegedly Lindsey Graham tells Karim Khan that the ICC is supposed to be a weapon against the US's geopolitical adversaries, right? It's only supposed to be for Africa and for thugs like Putin. When he says something like that, of course it's grotesque and it completely flies in the face that the United States is, this beacon for democracy and human rights and an international rules-based order or whatever the hell. It flies in the face of that, but it's also important in the sense that, you can clearly get a sense here, when, this is the first time that the ICC has actually gone after either a Western government or a top Western ally like Israel, that this is a really big shift, right? This is not normal. They don't usually go after countries like Israel at the ICC. So it's a disgusting comment, but it's also kind of true. That has been how the ICC has typically operated. They do disproportionately focus on Africa, for example, rather than war crimes committed by the United States or France or the United Kingdom or Israel for that matter. Now, they continue here. They say the allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity that Khan leveled against Netanyahu and Gallant all relate to Israel's 8-month war in Gaza, which, according to the territory's health authority, has killed, of course, more than 35,000 people, and I think that is a drastic undercount by any metric. They say the ICC case has been a decade in the making, inching forward amid rising alarm amongst Israeli officials at the possibility of arrest warrants, which would prevent those accused, again, from traveling to any of the court's 124 member states for the fear of arrest. It is in this specter of prosecutions in The Hague that one former Israeli intelligence official said one former intelligence official said had led, quote, the entire military and political establishment to regard the counteroffensive against the ICC, quote, as a war that has to be waged and one that Israel needed to be defended against. It was described in military terms. That war commenced in January of 2015 when it was confirmed that Palestine would join the court after it was recognized as a state by the United Nations General Assembly. Its ascension was condemned by Israeli officials as a form of diplomatic terrorism. Diplomatic terrorism. I don't know if they're referring to the UN General Assembly voting to make Palestine like an observer state, or if they're talking about Palestine trying to join the Rome Statute and therefore giving the ICC the jurisdiction to go after Israeli war crimes committed against Palestinians. I don't know which one they're referring to here as diplomatic terrorism, but in either case, that's also totally insane, right? Diplomatic terrorism for what exactly? For being a participant at the United Nations or for trying to get accountability for war crimes? I mean, keep in mind, the ICC is not only going after Israel, they're also going after Palestinians. They're going after top Hamas leaders as a part of this application for arrest warrants. So it's not as if there's some like bias here against Israel and, oh, they're being so unfair against the Israelis. No, they're actually going after Hamas officials, and actually they have more counts that they brought against the top Hamas officials than they did against Yoav Gallant and Benjamin Netanyahu. But they call this diplomatic terrorism. And they're talking about all of this as if it's like a war. Like we need to go to war alongside the United States against the ICC to prevent any sort of accountability. Now they continue, they say one former defense official familiar with Israel's counter-ICC effort said that joining the court had been perceived as a crossing of a red line and perhaps the most aggressive diplomatic move taken by the Palestinian Authority, which governs the West Bank. Quote, to be recognized as a state in the UN is nice, they added, but the ICC is a mechanism with teeth. Okay, so I guess we just got our answer, right? They were talking about Palestine's ascension to be a signatory of the ICC, giving, again, the authority for them to have jurisdiction over crimes committed against Palestinians. So clearly, as much as they like to dismiss the ICC and talk about how, unserious they are, clearly behind the scenes, they're fucking terrified. They're terrified of the ICC. They're saying this is a mechanism that has teeth, okay? So, I mean, that's a pretty big revelation there from behind the scenes. Now, here's where it gets somehow even more deranged than it already was, right? We already have the spying. We already have the hacking into their cell phones, their emails. They're pre-preparing for any allegations that may come their way. They're trying to sabotage it the entire time. And this is happening over years and years and years. But here's where it gets even more insane. Under the section, a hand-delivered threat. On the 16th of January, 2015, within weeks of Palestine joining, Bensouda, the former prosecutor, opened a preliminary examination into what the legalese of the court was called the situation in Palestine. The following month, two men who had managed to obtain the prosecutor's private address turned up at her home in The Hague. Sources familiar with the incident said that the men declined to identify themselves when they arrived, but said they wanted to hand-deliver a letter to Bensouda on behalf of an unknown German woman who wanted to thank her. The envelope contained hundreds of dollars in cash and a note with an Israeli phone number. Huh? Sources with knowledge of an ICC review into the incident said that while it was not possible to identify the men or fully establish their motives, it was concluded that Israel was likely to be signaling to the prosecutor that it knew where she lived. The ICC reported the incident to Dutch authorities and put in place additional security, installing CCTV cameras at her home. Guys, according to their own conclusions from this investigation here, the government of Israel likely sent people to the lead prosecutor's home, to her personal home, to hand deliver an envelope filled mysteriously with cash from somebody saying, we love your work. Clearly, that's not the case. But they sent people to her home, okay, with an Israeli phone number on it. Very clear message that they're sending there, right? We know where you live, and we can get to you. That's the message that they were sending there. I mean, this is just an overt threat against this prosecutor. Again, I have to emphasize, for doing what? For daring to consider having some sort of an investigation into Israeli war crimes. These are the lengths that they will go to prevent accountability. They say multiple Israeli sources said the leadership of the IDF wanted military intelligence to join in this effort, which was being led by other spy agencies, to ensure that senior officers could be protected from ICC charges. They say, quote, "We were told that senior officers are afraid to accept positions in the West Bank because they are afraid of being prosecuted in The Hague, according to one of their sources." I'm sorry, you should be. You should be afraid of going into the West Bank as some sort of a senior officer or a commander of sorts to help aid and abet in completely illegal settlement expansion. You should be afraid of being in that position. You should feel the specter, the haunting specter of international law bearing down on your neck. That's what international law is supposed to be about, right? It's supposed to be about preventing things like an endless ethnic cleansing and expansion of illegal settlements into occupied territory. These settlements are war crimes under international law. It's very cut and dry. It's not up in the air in any way, shape, or form. So you should be fucking afraid. You should be afraid of The Hague. That's how this should be working in a reasonable world. And they continue down here. Hacked emails and monitored calls. 5 sources familiar with Israel's intelligence activities said that it routinely spied on the phone calls made by Bensouda and her staff with Palestinians. Blocked by Israel from accessing Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, the ICC was forced to conduct much of its research by telephone, which made it more susceptible to surveillance. And this is where we get completely, off the rails here, guys. If it wasn't already off the rails, now it's off the rails. This is a quote. "If Fatou Bensouda spoke to any person in the West Bank or Gaza, then that phone call would enter the intercept systems," one source said. Another said that there was no hesitation internally over spying on the prosecutor, adding that, and this is a quote, "With Bensouda, she's black and African, so who cares?" Let me say that one more time. "With Bensouda, she's black and African, so who cares?" This is how they're viewing this, guys. I mean, not exactly surprising. We see the brazen racism on display from top Israeli officials, within Israeli society generally, against Palestinians. Here we get to see it expands beyond just racism against Palestinians, okay? It's just racism in general. Well, sure that she's the lead prosecutor for the ICC and she's incredibly qualified, but she's black and she's of African origins. And so who gives a fuck if we spy on her, if we hack into her communications, if we send people to her house to intimidate her for trying to investigate our war crimes? Who cares, right? She's not white, so nobody's going to make a big fuss about it, right? This is what they're saying. They continue down here. They say, officials also became aware of specific threats against a prominent Palestinian NGO called Al-Haq, which is one of several Palestinian human rights groups that frequently submitted information to the ICC, often in lengthy documents detailing incidents that it wanted the prosecutor to consider. The Palestinian Authority also submitted similar dossiers. They say years later, after this, after the ICC had opened a full investigation into the Palestine case, Gantz designated Al-Haq and 5 other Palestinian rights groups as terrorist organizations, a label that was rejected by multiple European states and later found by even the CIA to be unsupported by any evidence. Guys, when the CIA is doing a little fact check on you, when the CIA is unwilling to label an organization as a terrorist organization, then you're wrong. You're wrong. The CIA considers everybody who doesn't perfectly fall in line with U.S. interests to be a terrorist organization. All right, let's be real. So even the CIA, European nations are saying these organizations you just labeled as terrorists are not terrorists. There's no evidence to support that. You just had the Israeli government effectively trying to silence them to prevent their capacity to function, the function being sending information to the ICC so that they're equipped with evidence to bring against Israel. And you're just labeling them as terrorist organizations to try to shut them down, to try to blacklist them, to target them. I mean, it's unreal. The organization said that the designations were a targeted assault against those most actively engaging with the ICC. And yeah, I mean, obviously. Now, I want to skip down here, and we'll finish off with this here, because they also note how Trump, under his administration, aided and abetted and worked very closely with the Israelis to try to crack down on the ICC. So here from that section, they say, in March of 2020, 3 months after Bensouda referred the Palestine case to the pre-trial chamber, an Israeli government delegation reportedly held discussions in Washington with senior U.S. officials about a joint Israeli-American struggle against the ICC, a struggle against international law and accountability. One Israeli intelligence official said that they regarded Donald Trump's administration as more cooperative than that of his Democratic predecessor, so they're referring to Obama. The Israelis felt sufficiently comfortable to ask for information from U.S. intelligence about Bensouda. So now you have the U.S. also participating in this sort of intelligence network apparatus to go after Bensouda. And this was a request that the source said would have been impossible back during Obama's term. Days before the meetings in Washington, Bensouda had received authorization from the ICC's judges to pursue a separate investigation into war crimes in Afghanistan committed by the Taliban and both Afghan and U.S. military personnel. I believe that this didn't end up happening. I believe that I think that this was actually Karim Khan later on said basically like, we're going to look forward, not backwards, right? We're not going to consider these war crimes charges against the U.S. But they say, fearing U.S. armed forces would be prosecuted, the Trump administration was engaging in its own aggressive campaign against the ICC, culminating in the summer of 2020 with the imposition of U.S. economic sanctions on Bensouda and one of her top officials. So sanctioning the ICC is not even a new thing, right? If the Joe Biden administration does that, that will just be him doing exactly what Donald Trump did a few years ago, right? Biden then undid the sanctions that Trump levied against the ICC, at least I think a majority of the sanctions, and now he's considering, it looks like, reapplying those to the ICC. Now, say among ICC officials, the U.S.-led financial and visa restrictions on court personnel were believed to relate as much to the Palestine investigation as to the Afghanistan case. Two former ICC officials said that senior Israeli officials had expressly indicated to them that Israel and the U.S. were working together. And at a press conference in June of that year, senior Trump administration figures signaled their intention to impose sanctions on ICC officials, announcing that they had received unspecified information about financial corruption and malfeasance at the highest level of the court. Okay, so guys, this is completely insane. We have a totally rogue state, an apartheid state, in the midst of committing a genocide. We have a U.S. government that is fully complicit in backing and arming and funding and giving diplomatic cover for that genocide, and apparently now on top of that, giving intelligence support throughout the years to Israel to try to undercut the ICC. We now have a U.S. government that is considering imposing sanctions on the ICC. All for what exactly? For what? Because we don't want to actually abide by the values that we claim that we abide by. International law, rules-based international order, human rights, democracy, freedom, etc., etc. This is how you know that rhetoric is utter bullshit, okay? You know, we know exactly how the U.S. views the United Nations, the ICC, the ICJ. We view them as weapons. We view them as tools so that we can go after our geopolitical adversaries. These are not institutions that are supposed to be wielded against the United States, against Israel, against Western European governments. This is supposed to be our weapon. And so the fact that now the ICC is issuing arrest warrants, not just for like low-ranking soldiers, but for the Prime Minister of Israel, the United States' closest ally in the world, as well as his defense minister, for some of their actions since October 7th, I mean, guys, this is giant. And the way that you can tell that it actually matters, and it's not something to just gloss over, is by the Israeli reaction. If this wasn't a big deal, they wouldn't be freaking out about it. They wouldn't have spent the last decade doing everything in their power to try to surveil and hack into and intimidate and threaten and to undercut the ICC. That's how you know that this actually matters. And so I hope that this is a quick process. I've heard before that sometimes it takes a month or so. Sometimes it can take up to a year for the ICC to officially issue arrest warrants after this application process plays out. I hope it's quick, and I hope that they start adding charges on top of it, because there are so many other things that we've seen unfold, not just in the last 6, 7, 8 months, but years and years before that Israel needs to face accountability for. So, you know, credit to Karim Khan, credit to Bensouda back in the day for you know, withstanding this absolutely gargantuan amount of pressure coming down on them, not just by Israel, but by the most powerful government and military force in the world, the United States of America. And hopefully, you know, at some point, we could have at least some measure of accountability for these brazen genocidal monsters.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying